to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Tuesday, March 17th, 2015. Getting into the week here. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. Phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. First of all, happy St. Patrick's Day. We've got our little green out here. We've got the bottle of Irish whiskey all set to go, and getting into that festive mood here. I actually aired in that I forgot to mention yesterday was the anniversary of the murder by bulldozer of Rachel Corrie, but then I don't feel so bad about it because it certainly wasn't mentioned on any of the American corporate media either. Quick program note, tomorrow in our third hour, Michael Strizky of the Hydrogen House Project will be our on-air guest talking about these new technologies and their potentials for the future. Obviously, the top news is the elections in Israel. The polls are just now closing. They're starting to release information from the exit polls. And they're really all over the place. I mean, Fox News is saying it's neck and neck. Others are saying, oh no, there's a huge lead for the Union Party, and it's just really all over the place here. And of course, it's not going to be over until it's over. But some of the last-minute electioneering really it crossed a line there. Netanyahu was tweeting all of his supporters saying, you've got to get to the polls because those Arabs are voting. The Arabs are voting and they're shifting things to the left and we've got to fight. And just literally race baiting, trying to win the election. One of the other parties was handing out pamphlets saying that if you voted for them, you would automatically go to heaven when you died. That one drew quite a bit of criticism as well. So they're going on and on about this, and of course we know from prior experience that even if Likud and Netanyahu lose, they can game the system. They did that to Shimon Peres and a couple of other times where everybody was singing the demise of Netanyahu, and because of the way Israel's coalition government is structured and the rules, he was able to make deals with enough people and bring them on board and say, we'll give you all these powerful offices if you'll vote for me for prime minister, and he got in. So it isn't over until it's over. We're going to grab a quick phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Boy, all this total movement of pieces all over the chessboard going on, right? You got deals with Iran, things falling apart with Israel. You got the Asian Investment Bank going on. I mean, you can't keep up.
No, yeah, it is. This is a time of change and chaos, and which can be either good or bad. But there's a lot of chaos going on. There's no question about it. The powers that be have lost control of their little world of illusion, mostly because they've lost the trust and faith of the people of planet Earth.
I think the Federal Reserve at this point, they know the jig is up. And a lot of those bankers know the jig is up too. So you're going to see more people starting to jump ship. I mean, obviously the UK, now Italy, Germany and France. I mean, the writing's on the wall. You can't deny it at this point.
No, and the problem with any private central bank and a debt-based currency is it eventually does self-destruct. There is no way to have a stable economy underneath the private central bank that issues all the public currencies alone at interest. It's impossible. But the people who set these things up know that the collapse won't come until long after they are dead, after they've had their lives of wealth and power and privilege and luxury, and they don't care that their great-great-great-grandchildren are going to pay the price for it. They don't care. They absolutely do not. They know there's no afterlife, there's no heaven, there's no hell. They want their goodies now, and this is how they get it.
And these people, they're all families, and they all have giant loopholes and offshore bank accounts, so their money is already in Asia.
Well, it's certainly someplace, and what's interesting to note is despite the little Forbes list of the world's richest people, the really rich are never on it. The really rich don't want people to know just how much wealth they have looted from the people of planet Earth over time. So that's why Bill Gates sort of gets the nod of, oh, he's the richest person, he's worth $40 billion, and yet we know these banking families are worth trillions.
Oh, the Rothschilds, they're rumored to be worth $100 to $500 trillion.
The number I heard was 15 trillion, but nobody really knows. They hold themselves invisible to the rest of the world.
And, Russia and Putin know that. I mean, look at all the drills they're doing. They know it's coming soon. They know.
Yes. In order to prolong the hegemony of the U.S. dollar, the U.S. is going to commit wars of aggression against Russia and potentially China. These are all wars of aggression. None of these are just. None of these are legal under international law. These are wars of aggression.
It's just not going to work. I mean, because I see more of a split coming. Like I said, I think Germany and France are still going to, no matter what Merkel says, they're going to flip. They flipped already with this investment bank because they can't. I mean, the economies are collapsing. They need to keep their economies going, and they have to go with the future, and that's the East.
The U.S. dollar's hit the iceberg. It's down by the bow and taking water, and all these other countries are starting to head for the lifeboats. And right now, China's got the corner on the lifeboats.
Yep, it's going to be who's out the door first.
Yes, it always is.
And the more we say, to the UK, why are you accommodating the Chinese? The more we put our foot in our mouth.
Yeah, all these countries, the UK, are going to turn around and say, you did it to yourselves. We're not the bad people here. You fought a revolution to break free of the Bank of England, then turn around and sold your people back into the same stupid system. So it's your own fault, and that's exactly right.
It's imperial hubris, arrogant. Mike, I just want to make a comment. If you on May 9th, when Victory Day parade's on, they're going to show off some new stuff, like the new Armada tank, supposedly, and
you mean Russia?
And the new fighter might make an appearance. They're on YouTube already, but to see it flying over, Moscow would be a sight there.
Well, I presume they're having better luck with that than the U.S. is with the F-35, the F-22, the Independence-class littoral combat ships, and so forth. Yeah, the
F-35's a disaster. But, they sunk so much money into it already, I guess they'd look even worse if they stopped doing it.
Well, that's the conventional thinking. I'm always a believer in cutting your losses and not throwing good money after bad. But the attitude in Washington, D.C. is, well, we've already spent so much on it. We have to keep going to get it to work, to prove that we were right all along, no matter how many trillions of dollars it's going to take. And meanwhile, of course, we have people who are going hungry in this country, sleeping in the streets. Detroit can't afford water, but we've got trillions of dollars to put into these weapons.
Yeah, isn't it amazing how they can scrape up $5 billion to overthrow a government in Ukraine, but they can't invest that in Detroit, bring some factories home, build stuff? These people don't care.
No, they don't. Detroit already belongs to us. We don't need to invest any money there. We're spending our money to expand our imperial reach across the globe. And the globe is standing up and saying, hey, cut it out.
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now, this is a bizarre story, and this is coming out of Fox News. Okay? There is a Senate panel, bipartisan, we are told, that is going to investigate possible Obama administration ties to the campaign against Netanyahu in Israel. How dare you meddle in their internal affairs? How dare you stand up against Netanyahu? I mean, the hypocrisy is stunning on this one, both because of chronic U.S. interference in the internal politics of nations around the world, at least 50 times, probably more since the end of World War II, and because Netanyahu himself tried, with the connivance of the Congress, to subvert the administration's Iran policy. More about this when we come back from these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, before the commercial, we were talking about there is now a Senate panel in the United States Senate, bipartisan, we're told, investigating if the Obama White House was tied in with an anti-Netanyahu party in Israel. Apparently there was some kind of a donation made to a PAC that found its way over there, and the Senate's just in an uproar. How dare you go and tinker with Netanyahu's campaign? And as I mentioned before, this is stunning hypocrisy. considering that the U.S. government makes a regular habit of going into other countries and tinkering with their internal politics, whether it's coup d'etat, overthrow, bribery, blackmail, or outright invasion and bombing and assassination. And, of course, we're talking about Netanyahu, who, with the connivance of the United States Congress, attempted to subvert the administration's Iran policy. That's interfering with the internal politics. The Senate seems to have this attitude of, well, it's okay for Netanyahu to run around the world tinkering with nations. That's his job, but not us. We're only the United States of America. We're not allowed to do that to Israel. We can do it to everybody else. Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Libya. We can do it to all those, but never Israel. Almighty Israel. Now, what makes this worse is there's a very obvious factionalization going on in Washington, D.C. There's this huge crevasse, a schism, opening up between the pro-Israel members of Congress, which is most of them, and the White House. And it's one thing to have that kind of a faction fight behind closed doors, but now it's on full display to the rest of the world, along with the fact that Israel has co-opted most of the Congress of the United States of America. And neither of these public perceptions are going to help America's foreign policy, as other countries are seeing a government in Washington, D.C. clearly divided against itself, and all because of meddling by an outside power, Israel. They're not sure who's really calling the shots over here. And it makes it hard for any foreign nation to take anything being put out by the U.S. government as policy seriously. It could change within 24 hours. Now, Netanyahu has been calling up all of his celebrity buddies to make TV commercials for them. We had John Voight was out there campaigning for him, and apparently he got actor Chuck Norris, martial arts star and film star, to come out and make a commercial about Netanyahu's a strong leader. And normally I wouldn't bother paying attention to that kind of nonsense, but over on the YouTube page where this Chuck Norris video is, as of the last time I checked, there were more than 2,300 dislikes on that video. So I don't think Chuck Norris has done himself any favors signing on with Netanyahu. Now, Paul Krugman has an interesting observation. He is taking the position that Netanyahu's grandstanding before Congress wasn't really about Iran, because domestically, Israel's in serious trouble. Their economy is a mess. There's a greater wealth inequality there than pretty much anywhere else in the world except for the United States. All this money is pouring in to Israel from our taxpayers, Canada's taxpayers, everybody's taxpayers, reparations, this and that, but it's all piled up on the top of the leadership. And ordinary people in Israel are dealing with major hardships, and polls show this election is all about domestic agenda. Not Iran, not Palestine, not Gaza, none of that stuff. And Krugman was saying that Netanyahu's grandstanding and pushing forward with Iran was intended as a distraction to try and get the people of Israel to don't pay attention to that economic thing. Yeah, you're overweight anyway. You could stand to miss a few meals. We've got to go after Iran. We've got to go after the terrorists. Terror. But we have heard politicians all over the world play that terror card so many times. The weapons of mass destruction, this and that. We're tuning out. And Netanyahu has done tremendous damage, not only to himself and his party, but to the government of Israel, by putting on public display Israel's subversion of the U.S. Congress. He's opened up this faction fight between Israel's supporters in the U.S. Congress and the White House that is also on full public display. These are all going to be seen as symptoms of not only political weakness of the United States of America, but a possible fracturing of the federal government, the beginning of the end. We saw similar things happening in the Soviet Union before the final collapse, where this portion of the government was openly in conflict with the other portions of the government. And they started breaking into their own little camps, hurling insults and abuse at each other. Now, over in Great Britain, at the University of Southampton, they wanted to have this conference on international law and Israel's treatment of Palestine. And needless to say, The Israel lobby and British officials are trying to shut this down. They have been met with a global expression of support by academics around the world saying, look, universities are supposed to be areas where ideas get examined, explored, new ideas are created. That's what universities and colleges are for, as open forums to decide what's best for the future. But of course, Israel's attitude is, you never question us. And the British politicians, who are just as owned by Israel as American politicians, are out there saying, you can talk about anything you want, as long as it's not Israel. Interesting article out of Mondo Weiss. Surging support for Palestine fuels Jewish Voices for Peace's biggest meeting yet. Their first meeting was in 1999. Total of 15 people showed up. Last weekend they had their latest meeting, over 500 people. Sellout crowd. People were standing outside. Hundreds of people outside. There wasn't room for them. So the world is definitely changing. Now, Mike Huckabee has sent John Kerry a letter declaring Kerry to be offensive and hypocritical on Israel and just excoriating Kerry. Your willingness to trust Iran and undermine Israel is unprecedented and wrong. And, of course, my response to that is, okay, Mike Huckabee, if you really feel that way, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, so forth and so on. But the reality is we are seeing Israel's minions in the United States government putting themselves on prominent display. The voters are not going to miss that. And they're going to be thinking about that long and hard come 2016, especially those families who got their children back in those cheap metal boxes or didn't get them back at all. And I think we're starting to see a panic among the Israel supporters in the U.S. government. They don't know what to do. The party is coming to an end. And all they can do is just get more and more hysterical with their screaming and screeching and politicking. And all that does is call public attention to what's really been going on in this country all along. We've got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about signs of the political order starting to fray at the edges and break apart. Netanyahu's grandstanding before Congress has rubbed the American people's noses in the fact that the United States Congress is working for Israel and not for the American people. There is a very obvious fracturing of relations between Congress and the White House, and it's opening up a schism, and it's causing serious doubt among America's allies around the world. These are not things that should be on public display. And we're starting to see a little tit-for-tat going on here because the U.S. national intelligence has now dropped Iran and Hezbollah from the list of known terrorist threats. And, of course, these are both basically giving the finger to Israel, which has been out there screaming, Iran's a sponsor of terror, Hezbollah is terror, everybody's a terrorist except me. Now, you're going to love this story. We were talking the other day about Hillary's clarification about her emails, where they went from saying that they determined what emails were responsive to Congress by means of a keyword search. Everybody said that's hardly comprehensive. And then she clarified it to say that, no, the emails were all being read by real-life human beings. That's the clarification. We're not going to call it a lie. That's just politically incorrect. It's a clarification. So now we have this story that we're seeing over in Kuna.net, where the Obama administration clarifies Kerry's comments on Syria, saying that Assad must go. Now, this, of course, is not a clarification. It is a complete 180-degree reversal of what Kerry said, which is the path to peace in Syria is going to have to involve Assad. And Obama has now clarified Kerry, saying, Assad must go, Assad must go. That's been our agenda for going on 4 years, and we never quit. We're never wrong. We never admit failure, no matter how stupid they look. All righty, and the propaganda with ISIS is continuing. Now they're saying ISIS has established a foothold in Afghanistan. So now we can go back and reinvade Afghanistan, right? Right, because ISIS is there. That's what ISIS was made for. An excuse for war on any country on earth simply by saying, ooh, ISIS is there. story at Investment Watch blog. The U.S. trained and armed Iraqi forces are under investigation for basically committing the same crimes that we are told ISIS is doing, including beheadings. But they're the good guys, so corporate media is not going to make a big deal out of that story. We've got to keep everybody focused on how bad ISIS is. Yesterday we were talking about the revelation that one of the ISIS videos showing destruction of antiquities in a museum was outed as involving plaster replicas, not the actual original artifacts. One of the directors of the Baghdad Museum came out and said, no, those are just copies. They're not the real ones. We have the real ones here. Those are just fakes. And then we had some official in the country's media and tourism industry coming out and say, media and tourism bureaucracy come out and say, oh no, those were real. ISIS is destroying antiquities. ISIS bad. ISIS bad. So now they're ramping it up here. We've got this story out of the Daily Mail in Great Britain. ISIS tears down the cross. Chilling photographs reveal how ISIS thugs have ravaged Christian churches. And it turns out all of this information is coming from MEMRI, MEMRI, the Middle East Media Research Institute. So just remember that for a little bit here. You remember not too long ago, there was actually an ISIS propaganda that ISIS was issuing pamphlets on how to handle your sex slaves, which no real devout Muslim would even engage in such things. So once again, they're putting out claims about ISIS which undermine that this is somehow connected with Islam. That, too, also came from MEMRI. Now, the reason I'm hitting this is because MEMRI, the Middle East Media Research Institute, in the United States of America, it's a nonprofit, gets taxpayer funds to operate, and it provides translations of Arabic media to the U.S. TV networks and newspapers. So far, so good. The problem is, over time, it has become very obvious those translations are skewed, biased, often intentionally wrong, to make Arabs always look bad. A good example would be when Ahmadinejad said that Zionism must vanish from the pages of history. MEMRI translated that into Iran will wipe Israel off the face of the map, which went from being a passive observation to a declaration of war, and everybody said, oh, Iran is going to wipe Israel off the map, go to war, go to war, go to war. And it turns out the people who run MEMRI are all tied in with Israeli intelligence. It's a propaganda op. And it seems to be taking over from Site Intelligence Group to pump out the propaganda about ISIS now that Site Intelligence is starting to be viewed with a great deal of skepticism. Because Rita Katz is connected with Israeli intelligence. Her father was executed as an Israeli spy. You don't get much more connected than that. Very alarming story coming out of the Saker.is. France is at war with alternative medias. And they're pointing out the hypocrisy that in the wake of the Charlie Hebdo attack, France was out there saying, we value freedom of speech, we value freedom of speech. Well, only if what you're saying is something the government of France agrees with, because France has been arresting people for merely doubting the official story. And basically, Hollande is now trying to equate conspiracy theories to growing Nazism and saying we must prevent the dissemination on the internet and social networks. This dovetails very much with that spiel we got from C-SPAN the other day, declaring conspiracy theories and conspiracy theorists a threat to the national security. Which, if your nation is governed by lies, fraud, and deceptions, yeah, it is a threat. There's no question it's a threat. Alrighty, story out of Blacklisted News. Stratfor is claiming that right now the U.S. is trying to prevent a new German-Russian alliance. And it's an interesting story, and it seems to be coming out of left field until you look at all the other nations that are starting to very slowly push back from the U.S., NATO, Eurozone table and starting to look very favorably toward Russia, most recently Cyprus and possibly, potentially Greece as well. Now, the people of Greece are very unhappy over how they have suffered under the European Union. Merkel is still on board with the one world government. She thinks she's going to have a high position someplace in the planetary government. But the ordinary people of Germany are really fed up with it. And if the Eurozone crumbles and Merkel is voted out of office, Germany could easily see a government that's going to say, you know, we're going to get a better deal working with Russia and China than we're going to get working with the United States of America. So it's not that far-fetched at all. Now, over in Kiev, the Rada just adopted amendments to the law on the special status of the Eastern Ukrainian republics, recognizing them as occupied territories, occupied by Kiev. Donbass and the Lugansk have basically come out and said the amendments are meaningless because they were not involved in the debate and negotiations about it. Same argument they had regarding the Minsk agreement. We are not bound by laws and agreements to which we ourselves are not part of the negotiations. So they're still running around in circles on that. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, we're still talking about events up in Ukraine and looking in the Russian language media. Apparently, there are major riots taking place in Ukraine. And including the firebombing of places where Kiev soldiers are staying. So it's very tense over there. Now, there's another interesting little story out of Investment Watch blog. The U.S.-sponsored new Ukrainian government is suiciding high-profile politicians connected to the former president. And the Western media reaction is, nah, it's a suicide. Trust us, it's just suicide. And then you have this small-time nobody opposition leader, Nemtsov, is killed in Russia, and the Western media just went ballistic. Oh, it had to be Putin. He's an evil guy. The American media is biased. It is filtered. It's there to sell you the agenda, the war, the tax, the candidate. Now, apparently, part of the unrest in Ukraine involves an army vehicle that accidentally hit and killed an 8-year-old, and that triggered riots that have gotten so bad the Ukrainian police officers have been granted shoot-to-kill authority, trying to tamp that down. Now, if you look at this last year of suffering and hardship for all the people of Ukraine over this stupid argument over whose brand of paper and ink the world is supposed to use, and realize that it is going to spread across the globe unless we find a way to stop it right now. Major protests down in Brazil. Leader of the left down there is saying this is just another CIA coup d'etat. But it does seem to be having traction all across the country. I've had listeners who are down in Brazil send me pictures of the marches, which are peaceful. They're not violent. And we posted those to whatreallyhappened.com. Now, here's where the news gets really interesting. We were talking about how Great Britain the other day signed on to this new Chinese-led bank, this Asian investment bank. And the White House said, how can you do that? We've got the special relationship going back to 1776. You must, go through the dollar like everybody else. You signed the Bretton Woods Agreement. Forgetting that Richard Nixon technically ended Bretton Woods when he ended gold convertibility. Well, the news is getting worse for the United States and the Federal Reserve because Germany, France, and Italy have now signed on to this China-led Asian investment bank. So these countries are now going to be conducting a large part of their foreign trade and banking without going through the U.S. dollar. And to add insult to injury, Australia just signed on. Major, colossal political defeat for Obama. It's coming apart. The dollar hegemony is coming apart. That's why they're in such a rush to try and get a war going with anybody. They don't even care anymore. Iran, Russia, China, we don't care. We'll declare war on Antarctica. We know we can win that one. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog again. Greece's default probability rises as euro exit seems inevitable. And it does. Because Tsipras and Syriza cannot remain in power in Greece if they break the promises they made to the Greek voters. And the European Union and the ECB are up against a wall. They can't cut Greece any slack on the debt without every other member nation of the European Union demanding exactly the same. There's only one way this is going to end. I mean, when you've got the European Union out there saying, don't pay your workers for 2 months and give us the money. Or, it's time to do a Cyprus on the savings accounts of the Greek people and just take their money and give it to the bankers. When you have suggestions like that coming down the pike, and I'm sure to the money junkies, this is all very acceptable behavior. Oh, yes, we must take from the poor to give to the rich. That's the way the world is supposed to be. But ordinary people looking at that, the harshness of it, the callousness of this attitude coming from the money junkies, I agree. It's only a matter of time before Greece just says, we're out of the euro, we're out of the European Union, and we're not paying these debts that we know were created through fraud with Papandreou and Goldman Sachs. And that will trigger the derivatives firestorm. Now, the Greek defense minister, Panos Kamenos, is saying that if Greece exits the Eurozone, they are fully expecting that Italy and Spain will follow. And possibly Germany, not too far behind. This gets back to that Stratfor story about how the U.S. is trying to figure out some way to prevent a German-Russian alliance. All of America's allies are starting to step back. Going to let the U.S. have a little bit of room around it on the floor so that when it falls over dying and flopping about and thrashing in its death throes, it doesn't hurt anybody. Now, we know that when this whole debt crisis thing erupted in Greece, one of the first things Greece did was to remind Germany about that little tiny annoyance, World War II, the Nazi occupation of Greece, the forcing of the Greek government to loan vast sums of money to the Nazis, which has never been repaid. And Merkel's attitude is, that's ancient history, it doesn't apply, we don't owe you the money, but you owe us money. And apparently, Merkel's own senior advisors had tapped her on the shoulder and said, yeah, actually, under international law, Athens does have a legitimate claim to reparations and repayment of those loans. Because after all, if Germany is still making reparations to Israel, then why shouldn't Greece fall under that same set of laws and rules? I think at this point we ought to have a global jubilee. All debts just erased right now, period, zero. Go back to status quo ante and reset the system. And I'm sure it'll be a minor inconvenience for the money junkies, but they'll just start their money junkie games all over again. Give them something to look forward to. Another century of economic predation on the people of the world. Now, Banco de Madrid has had to halt operations, and it's seeking protection from their creditors following U.S. accusations that its parent, Banca Privada de Andorra, has been engaged in money laundering. And at this point, I don't think there's a large multinational bank anywhere on the planet that's not involved in this laundering of money for drug criminals and politicians and tax evaders and terrorists, because we, the ordinary bank customer, we don't have enough money anymore to really be of any value to them. In fact, a lot of banks have now started saying, we don't want deposits under ceiling. We're closing your account. Get out. You're more trouble than you're worth. And apparently, in light of this news, customers of the bank are emptying their accounts. And the bank is now turning to the government of Spain, to their deposit guarantee fund, because all Spanish savings accounts are covered up to 100,000 euros. If the bank does run out of cash, which seems likely to happen now. Over in the European Central Bank, they've started their version of quantitative easing, bond buying program, and apparently it is causing financial turbulence, just like it did here in the United States of America. It is amazing that the EU is going down this road, seeing the problems it caused here. But at this point, they don't have any other choice. It's either create instant money out of thin air to keep the system propped up, or step back and admit the system was flawed right from the very start. And they don't want to do that. because they're hoping that after the crash, they're going to restart the scam of private central banking all over again. And we cannot let them do that. Meanwhile, as of yesterday, the U.S. government blew through their $18 trillion debt limit ceiling. And so now we're going to start hearing the debate about raising the debt ceiling, or we're going to have to cut spending. And what are they going to cut spending on? The things that you actually want, the things you pay taxes for. Roads, schools, hospitals, care for the insecure, food, shelter for the homeless, electricity and water for Detroit. But they'll keep on shoveling money at the war machine and at Israel, and they won't even think about shutting down that wasteful NSA. They're going to punish you by cutting off the things you actually need from the government and go on spending money on what they think is their top priority, which has nothing to do with what's good for you. We're going to take a break for the news, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645, and Tom is still there, waiting for you to call on in. Wish him a happy St. Patrick's Day. Now then, finishing up with the economy, actually we have a little more to go on it. There is a rumor, and I stress this is a rumor, that Putin is considering nationalization of Russia's central bank. Now, Putin has already exerted governmental control over it. In fact, it was at that point that Putin went from being our ally in guiding a course to the future to making the U.S. government's, and especially the money junkies, special high-interest targets list. But apparently, Putin is very concerned that the central bank, which unfortunately, like the Federal Reserve, is owned by foreigners, is still doing the bidding of Washington, D.C. and London. And that they're collaborating with the West to harm Russia's economy. And the rumor is that he is just going to nationalize the central bank. It's certainly not without precedent. Following the Bretton Woods Agreement, Britain was forced to nationalize the Bank of England. And, of course, if this rumor is true and not just more war propaganda, Putin's position on the special high-interest targets list is probably going to get pushed up a little bit further toward the top if he's not already there. Now, as you know, yesterday the stock market was soaring. Had a bad Friday, really great day yesterday. Today, not so good. It's getting almost bipolar out there. And for those on the inside who know ahead of time what these swings are going to be, they can make a huge amount of money without returning anything of actual value to the society. Over at Market Watch, they're talking about how fund managers here in the U.S. are starting to flee U.S. stocks out of concern that the Federal Reserve may still raise rates. Because even though the rates are still on hold, we're seeing all this commentary coming from the Federal Reserve about how impatient they're getting. How impatient they are. They're not making their interest on all that money that's going out the door. We've got to make our... We're getting impatient. You people have to make this economy work for us. Well, the Federal Reserve is the reason the economy is down there in the Al-Qaeda in the first place. But money junkies, like politicians, can never admit error, mistake, can never change course. They're above that sort of thing here. Meanwhile, new U.S. home construction plunged 17% last month. That is a huge drop, and it may indicate that we're heading into another burst real estate bubble. The U.S. government is going to quietly purchase 5 million barrels of crude oil in an effort to try and prop up collapsing oil prices by creating an artificial demand. And probably they need to do some refilling of that strategic petroleum reserve anyway. Another article over at Investment Watch blog. Unemployed workers outnumber jobs in almost every industry. In other words, there is no sign of a skills gap. The jobs just aren't there. They're overseas. Now, here's an interesting story. This came out of the Los Angeles Times, no less. Recently up in Seattle, it was announced that several restaurants were going out of business. They were closing. And immediately the GOP got on that, banging the drum about, see what the hiking the minimum wage is going to do. It's driven these restaurants completely out of business. So David Watkins of the Lawyers, Guns, and Money blog went out and did some research and found out that's absolutely not the case. In some cases, the owners of the restaurants are selling their businesses. They're relocating. And one of them is just being shut down by an owner who's got 3 other restaurants and doesn't feel he needs the 4th one. And a survey of all these closing restaurants and the reasons for the closure did not find a single case where raising the minimum wage was a factor in their decision. Not a single one. Now, Nomi Prinz is getting right to the heart of the matter. The reason so many consumer-level businesses are in trouble, consumers don't have any money. All these billions and trillions in instantly created money is being poured all over the money junkies in Wall Street. And just like all the IMF funding going into Ukraine, none of it gets down to the level of the ordinary people. The so-called trickle-down economy was a joke even when Reagan proposed it. It absolutely was. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. We're going to go to Heidi in Nevada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but if you go to YouTube and type in presidents related to each other, all the presidents that we have had since 1776 is all related to one person. And that person is a king who is from the monarchy of England.
Well, you know, a lot of people are trying to make a big deal out of this, but for anybody who's gone into genealogy, when you go back enough generations, we're all related at some point here. In fact, if you have any French ancestry in you at all, then you're related to the historical personage of Joshua Christ. Because following that whole get out in Judea, Mary Magdalene went to France, had her daughter Sarah, and basically eventually their ancestors intermarried with the Sicambrian Franks, giving rise to the Merovingian kings. And when the Vatican, when the Catholic Church deposed the Merovingians and installed the Carolingians had been intermarrying with the Merovingians to bolster their social status. Now, Charlemagne was even more aggressive than Bill Clinton in betting virtually any woman he could find. And genealogists in France today accept it as an axiom that if you have French blood in you, you're a descendant of Charlemagne. And that means you're a descendant of the Merovingians, which means you're a descendant of the historical character of Jesus. Okay? And it doesn't really mean anything. You know, there's a gecko over here on the wall keeps reminding me that on his mother's side he's descended from Tyrannosaurus Rex, and wonders why I'm not really impressed by that. You know, genealogy is fun. You know, it gives you a sense of where you are in history, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee there's some kind of conspiracy or connection. It's a distraction, really.
Oh, well, I just thought it was weird that every one of our presidents, except for one, was related to this one king.
Okay, so, which king was that?
I think he was the one that did the Magna Carta. I'm not for sure.
But King John. That's a long way back. I'm probably descended from King John on the British line of the my mother's side of the family. I mean, it's good to be the king. King John was out being very generous with his DNA.
Oh.
Okay, I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think there's a there, but thank you very much for the phone call anyway. All righty, now then, it's time to get on to Email Gate. And Hillary's out there screaming, I did not have textual relations with that server, so forth and so on. And to put this into perspective, we need to keep in mind, Richard Nixon erased 18 minutes of tape recordings. Hillary deleted over 30,000 emails. And just like Nixon had to resign from public life, so too should Hillary. Because obviously there's something being covered up. And as Nixon himself said, it's not the crime that gets you, it's the cover-up. Americans are wonderfully willing to forgive crimes and transgressions, but the cover-up, the being lied to, that gets us angry. And it should. Under the constitutional model of the United States of America, that government is supposed to be our employees. Will you tolerate one of your employees lying to you, keeping secrets from you? I won't. You shouldn't. More about this when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And the latest word we're getting from the Israel elections is that officially it's too close to call, but Netanyahu is already out there doing his victory dance and running laps and grabbing the trophies and the laurels and the rest of it, which the fact that it's a dead heat at this point when only a few days ago the Likud party was so far behind here, I'm beginning to think they were using those Diebold voting machines, you know. Diebold, we guarantee the result. So we'll see. The vote itself has not been counted, but Netanyahu is absolutely convinced that he will win. And boy, if he does, there's going to be no stopping him. Your kids are going to be dying and being crippled in Iran by the end of the year, I guarantee it. All right, so we're getting back to the email scandal with Hillary Clinton. And it just gets worse and worse and worse because apparently Clinton's private email server used an outside spam filtering company, MX Logic, to basically make sure that spam and viruses and so forth weren't getting through. The problem with that is employees at MX Logic, which is owned by McAfee, had full access to all her classified State Department email in unencrypted form. Apparently, Hillary had absolutely no concerns about the privacy and security of her email other than from the American people. Everybody else, sure, come on in, read all this, read all about it. Read how we're going to mess with your country next. Now, Speaker of the House John Boehner is saying Hillary must hand over her server to a third party for forensic examination. And while I certainly agree with Boehner, I think it's a given at this point that Hillary has had some computer experts come on in to make sure that there is nothing on those hard drives that would incriminate her. There's special software that you can get that will make sure a file is really removed from the disk. Ordinary computer users, you hit delete and the file seems to disappear, but it's actually still on the hard drive until it is overwritten. All the delete command does is remove the name from the file lookup table. And a lot of police forensic work will basically scan the drive and recover all kinds of information from it. But there are tools that you can get that will actually remove the file. It overwrites it several times. Now, here's another little wrinkle that shows just what a reckless disregard for process that Hillary Clinton had. The State Department has had to acknowledge that former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton did not sign a separation agreement or separation statement upon leaving her job as Secretary of State. Now, it doesn't sound like that's a really big deal, but when you work for the government, especially with classification, when you leave, you have to sign a separation statement that says you understand. You may not do thus and such. You may not talk about thus and such. You are constrained from certain public statements and so forth and so on. And apparently Hillary never bothered signing that. Whether that means she's still technically an employee of the State Department or not, I don't know. But it's more of the Clinton disregard for the rules. Rules are for the little people. We don't have to obey them. We're the Clintons or we're the Bushes. We're the elite. We're the money junkies. All righty. Now, there's this little hearing going on in Congress where they're grilling the chief of the Secret Service protective detail over this recent accident where two drunk Secret Service agents were driving into the White House, drove over a suspicious package that was being examined at the time and collided with one of the collision barriers there. Now, remember that lady who got lost, tried to turn around and got shot dead? Well, these guys weren't shot dead, but they were apparently quite drunk, and they're having hearings about what's going on with all these breaches into the White House and so forth and so on. And why are they even talking about this on the news? I mean, why are they making this public? From a purely security standpoint, guarding the President of the United States of America, you don't advertise the weaknesses and lapses in his personal protection to the rest of the world. That's a stupid thing to do. you're basically handing potential threats a lot of useful information. Oh, we'll go into the White House after they've been drinking because they got a drinking problem there, which is not new. John F. Kennedy's Secret Service protective detail were getting totally smashed on Everclear the night before that assassination. And it's like, why are they putting this out there? I mean, I'm not a big fan of Obama and his policies, but let's not get reckless here. It's almost like they're inviting somebody to take a shot at him. This makes no sense at all whatsoever. I mean, is this the best that they can get for government work? And I'll admit, when the Secret Service were checking my wife and I out over at the food distribution, I wasn't particularly impressed with that guy either. They got to get some better people in there. They really, really do. All righty, now, the NSA, GCHQ, all of these various intelligence agencies involved in spying on all of you have decided that they're going to solve their problems regarding the legality, or to be honest, the illegality of what they're doing with a rebranding. We're going to change the name. That'll make it okay. We're not going to call it mass surveillance any longer. It's simply bulk data collection. We're just collecting data in bulk. It doesn't really mean anything. No, it's exactly the same thing. They're stealing all of your private data without warrants and using it for their own purposes. And again, going back to the scandal at the APEC conference they had in Seattle, U.S. government intelligence agents were breaking into the computers of attendants to that conference and stealing business secrets to give to Bill Clinton's cronies. That's got nothing to do with fighting terror. It's got nothing to do with fighting crime. It's got nothing to do with national security. It's just underhanded making money from other people's work. And one of the biggest areas of our economic development, if we're ever going to get this economy back together, is entrepreneurial endeavor. Small groups of people or individuals coming up with new products and new services on which new industries can be based. That's a good thing. It should be encouraged. But anybody developing a new product now has to understand that the instant they put it on a computer, some government bureaucrat can steal it and rush off and say, give me the money and I'll beat this to the market here. The biggest threat to our computer security is these government intelligence agencies, because they've built in all these back doors into all of our systems, which the real cyber criminals continue to find and use. So, quick little story before we hit the commercial break. The Pentagon is refusing to allow the United Nations torture investigator from meeting any of the prisoners down in Guantanamo. You're not allowed to see them. They might tell you bad things. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're about halfway down. I'm going to take a phone call here in just a second. Before we get there, story out of Wake Up From Your Slumber. Apparently, 3 judges have been fired for watching porn at work on their taxpayer-funded computers. A 4th resigned before he could be fired, and they're saying, but rest assured there was no child porn or illegal content. How do you know? Were you looking over their shoulder? All righty, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Minus from Greece. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mr. Rivero. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Well, I'm calling all the way around from the world.
And how?
If you put a pin from Hawaii and you put it through the earth, you go down to Delphi in Greece, if I'm not mistaken.
No, actually, we come out somewhere in the South Atlantic, but it's close enough, so, what's the Oracle telling you today?
Anyway, I've been following your predicaments on quotations for the past couple of years. I have to congratulate you for the effort you're pushing for against the little banksters of ours. Well, I had the opportunity and the privilege to study in the United States in the Northeast Coast, in New York and Boston back in the late 80s and early 90s, up to the mid-90s. I was privileged enough to work for Salomon Brothers back in 92, 93. All I have to tell you, to the listeners, well, up to 2008, I used to be an AIG manager. I resigned before the AIG situation, anyway, back in October. I'm calling in order to tell your listeners that we fellows were all together, from Hawaii to Greece to India to China. We're people who are against these people that have been suppressing our lives for the last at least 300, 400 years. We can go back at least 2,500 years. When Xerxes and his wife, Esther, who she was not from Persia, she came from Zion. I don't know if you're aware of that or not.
Well, I wasn't, but I'd rather keep the context of the discussion a little more recent than that here. What are you hearing about what's going on in Greece? Are the people there talking about leaving the European Union?
Well, okay, I'm going to go right to the point. The Greek populace, the Greek citizens of this country, they've been deceived for the numerous time. In the last at least 200 years. Syriza became with such prominence on changing things. However, though, we have to look on what they have done in the last 60 days, 60 days that they are in power. Well, the first 2-3 things that they did is the ones that we already know. First of all, they, how you can tell it, they get Lazard as a consultant for the Ministry of Economics. Lazard is a company who was founded back in the 1830s, 40s, and we know that Lazard used to be the consultants for the previous government and the government before the previous one. From Mr. George Papandreou into Papadimos, into Samaras, into today. So I wonder if the government who's been elected as a leftist in Greece, are they going to do something different? Actually, they're not. They're doing the same thing. They're following the same pattern like as their predecessors.
Well, so you've got the same situation in Greece we have here in the United States of America. Politicians may come and politicians may go, but the bankers are still calling the shots.
Exactly. We are the protectorate of the United States since 1947, when the Anglo-Saxons gave us into the America, quotations on that, to be the protectorate of the United States. Because if you look from above, Greece and especially Cyprus is like a steady plane carrier in the Aegean.
Yes.
So from Cyprus and through Echelon and the 2 bases that the British have there, after the so-called liberations of Cyprus, they've been controlling the whole area through the Echelon system. And I bet your listeners, and they know about Echelon and HARP and all the systems that have been conglomerately controlling our lives.
Well, that was the same rationale.
Excuse me?
I was going to say, that's the same rationale when the U.S. stole Hawaii. They called it the unsinkable battleship Hawaii in the middle of the Pacific, and it was all driven by what was perceived military necessity at the time. Again, before I let you go, the question I would really like to ask you is, the Greek people, obviously talking to you, you've been lied to once again. And ultimately, what is the feeling regarding Greece leaving the European Union?
Well, people really want to leave the European Union. Actually, they want to get out of the euro.
Yes.
As a first step. So we can get our own central bank, we get our own drachma or our own national currency in order to motivate and make our own economy. However, though, the media, as you might be aware of, is being controlled by the same people that control the media in the Western world. So most of the young people, most of the people, they've been indoctrinated into believing something that's not going to come. And that is the problem. But the whole consensus in the majority of the people, and don't forget, in 9 million people, 4 million people in Greece live under poverty standards. Not according to Minas, according to the Eurostat, the European Union. 4 million, more than 40%. And there are more people living in the bracket of 600 and 700 euros, about $800. I wonder, can a family of 4 people can live on $800? It's impossible nowadays. So we're on the verge of a civil revolution in Greece. will come in the next few months, maybe 6 months the least. We're going to get in a civil unrest.
Well, I'd sure like to find a way to avoid that.
In Greece. Today is Tuesday. I just came back home a couple of hours ago. It's about 12 o'clock at night right here. Mm-hmm. In the second biggest city in Greece, Thessaloniki. Everything is like a dead town.
Yeah.
Among 1.5 million people. That means there's no money.
Yes.
And there's so many people. You can go in every section of the city. You can see people digging into the garbage bins.
Oh, boy.
Not one, not two, but 3 or more at the same bin. This is what has been happening. Due to austerity measures for our friends, the banksters in New York, and I know them very well. So it's about time to rebel, mentally at least, in order to understand what has been happening for all of us. It doesn't matter if you live in Hawaii, in India, in Colombia, in Greece. We're under the same suppressors.
That's exactly right. That's
Mr.
what...
Rivero.
Yes.
It's been a pleasure having me on the show. I'll be delighted to talk to you and exchange some information more than we can talk about.
I look forward to it.
Can I leave my email or send you an email and then...
Send me an email. Send me an email. I don't want you to give out your email address over the air or you'll be subjected to harassment. So email me. Okay, email me.
I'm very well off our friends in NSA.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much as well for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and that is some very interesting information from the ground in Greece and about the situation there. And I would like to hope that there will not be a civil war, either in Greece or here in the United States of America, because the wrong people always get killed and crippled in these kinds of affairs. But it may not be avoidable any longer. And I get a lot of angry emails from people saying, you know, this pacifistic thing that you're doing is nonsense at times, and so forth and so on. But I still think, sit back, wait. The banking cartel is tearing itself apart with its own self-made debt. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And apparently Netanyahu is absolutely certain that he has won, and he's already working, getting his cronies in for the new government here. I mean, we don't need to count the actual votes here. I'm the new prime minister, and that's all you need to know. Which I'm certain there was a great deal of skullduggery to accomplish that outcome, but you know it's not over till it's over. And unfortunately, this means Netanyahu is going to go on subverting the Congress of the United States of America to get your children to be killed and crippled in a war on Iran. Period. End of discussion. Something you ought to keep in mind as we go into 2016, that everybody in that Congress who stood and gave thunderous applause to Netanyahu, and especially those 47 members of the Senate who violated the Logan Act, trying to derail the deal with Iran, need to be voted out of office. There is no more important issue for the 2016 election than getting rid of all these friends of Israel. Get them out of office, put them on a plane, let them move there. If they love Israel so much, what are they doing here in the United States of America? It's a rhetorical question. They're looting you of your wealth and your children's lives to serve Almighty Israel. All right, we've got some breaking stories coming on out. Syria is now claiming that they have shot down a U.S. Predator drone inside Syrian airspace, just north of the city of Latakia. And we're not spying on Syria, we're spying on ISIS. We're not making war on your country, we're not bombing your country, we're bombing ISIS. Now, earlier in the show, we were talking about how the U.S. has already exceeded its debt ceiling of $18 trillion. And they're either going to raise the debt ceiling or they're going to have to cut spending. And I said they're going to cut spending on the things you actually want from the government. The national parks, good highways, clean water. And they're going to go on spending your money on the things that you really don't want. And by golly, right here, we're seeing a new story. The U.S. Cyber Command will double its spending. Its budget is being doubled. U.S. Cyber Command will receive $364 million, almost double the $190 million they had in 2014. Very alarming story out of Sputnik News. Fox News military analyst General Jack Keane is saying that economic sanctions and NATO drills will not ensure European security, and the U.S. has got to start building air and ground bases right up on that Russian border. Just get in their face, right up next to the Kremlin, to counter Russian aggression. Well, not seeing Russia building bases along our border, are we? We know who the aggressor is and why they're aggressing. Even the authors of the war in Iraq are now admitting that, yeah, it was illegal, it was a war of aggression, we were all just lying to you about all this weapons of mass destruction because we needed to go into Iraq and make sure that Iraq's oil was only sold for the U.S. dollar. And this is just more of the same thing. Now, article out of Investment Watch blog. Obama increases war threat against Venezuela. And basically, it's going back over the long history of U.S. attempts to regime change Venezuela, going back to Hugo Chavez, and they're still doing it right now. And the U.S. has been building military bases all around Venezuela, supposedly for the war on terror and the war on drugs, neither of which are actually working. But they're garrisoning the Venezuela border. And coupled with the exposure of a U.S.-backed coup plot a couple of weeks ago, followed by the U.S. declaring sanctions on Venezuela for their human rights violation. Boy, pot calling the kettle black on that one. Maduro has now opened up political dialogue with Russia, saying we are willing to become part of your economic and security sphere. The more aggressive the United States gets at arm-twisting countries, the more these countries are being driven away from the United States and over toward Russia or China. And nobody in D.C. seems able to see that this policy is proving to be counterproductive. We're doing it because we're right, and we will always do what we're right at doing, because we're right to be right, to be right. Getting a story here that apparently the Pentagon has lost track of more than $500 million in U.S. military aid given to Yemen, which now is going through its own turmoil. And U.S. officials are now saying, well, you know, that stuff could wind up in the hands of Al-Qaeda. Except that, wait a minute, Al-Qaeda is now our friend. We're arming them against ISIS. It's like the left tentacle of the U.S. government doesn't know what the right tentacle is doing anymore. There's no coordination, and by golly, that is supposed to be the job of the White House. Maintaining that overview, the big picture, and that is definitely missing in U.S. foreign and military policy. Also along the lines of spending your money on things that you don't really care all that much about, the Pentagon is now getting ready to develop a new U.S. stealth bomber. CNN is saying it's shrouded in mystery. Well, yeah, it's supposed to be. That's how these things work. And they're basically coming around to acknowledging that the B-2 stealth bomber wasn't really as stealthy as they thought it was going to be. Neither is the F-117. One got shot down over Kosovo. And there have been tremendous advancements in radar technology to defeat stealth, including the having a distance between the emitter for the radar and its receiver, because all the stealth aircraft the U.S. has designed are built around this idea that the emitter for the radar and the receiver for the radar are in the same location. And that doesn't work. So the Air Force is already running on out there with a new, hugely expensive contract for a new U.S. stealth bomber, which is probably going to be as big a boondoggle as the F-35. Because most of our top engineers, they're already in other countries that respect manufacturing. I mean, if you look at the junk that's coming out of the U.S. military-industrial complex, they're spending vast sums of money, which is the point of the exercise, and they're not getting good product for it. And again, I go back to that Independence-class littoral combat ship. Underarmed, under-armored, computer systems wide open to jamming. Well, so is the Aegis system. We learned that with the USS Donald Cook. The lead ship in the Independence class had to be dry docked to replace major sections of the hull lost to corrosion. Has nobody over there ever heard of a zinc sacrificial anode to keep that from happening? Just a joke over there. And that's part of the problem. When government gets too big, it stops communicating with itself. Because they're all trying to matrix with each other. And they drown in the volume of their own communications, and they can't find the important information. They can't evaluate. They're dealing with the same thing over at the NSA with this bulk data collection. They may be collecting it all. I don't think they can make any sense out of it. Story over at, Ex-Republic TV regarding Texas State Representative Jason Villalba has introduced a bill to restrict people from filming the police and to criminalize bloggers by saying that only entities that have a government FCC broadcast license or who are recognized corporate newspapers have a right to call themselves media, and everybody should just shut the heck up. And that is censorship. Now, they've been trying to get around the Second Amendment by declaring that the right to keep and bear arms is a collective right, not an individual right. And this guy's trying to do the same thing with the First Amendment. You have a right to freedom of speech, but it's collective and is allowed only through U.S. government-approved venues and personnel. And it really is, it's ludicrous. If this wasn't the future of our nation and the freedom of our children at stake, we'd be laughing at this stuff. Meanwhile, over at Fox News, no less, fact-checkers went after Obama for his latest anti-gun screed, and apparently gave him, actually the Washington Post gave him 3 out of 4 Pinocchios for the lies he was telling to try and push his anti-gun agenda. They're really afraid of you, the American people. Democrats are still trying to lobby the ATF to find some way to ban ammunition. Just, we're not taking away your guns. We're just taking away the ammunition. Have you ever heard of home loading? We're going to take a break for the news, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Now, Netanyahu is over there in Israel proclaiming that he has won his election, but we are seeing in the European media that the exit polls are showing a tie between Likud and the Zionist Union. They're all saying too close to call, too close to call. So unless Netanyahu knows the fix is in, he's being a little bit premature. Of course, I tend to go with the theory the fix was in, because only a week ago, Likud was trailing the Zionist Union by a huge number of seats. And we know that the United States is not the only nation cursed with massive election fraud to keep the powerful in power. Getting on back to the economic news and talking about the China-led investment bank, apparently the total number of countries that have now signed on to this non-dollar international investment banking system is now 30. That's a significant chunk of the world. And they're starting to attract nations that used to be very much under the sway of the U.S. dollar. The almighty dollar is not as almighty as it once was. Now, getting on to the issue of gun rights, we were talking about how the Washington Post has awarded Obama 3 out of 4 Pinocchios for misstatements he's made in demanding that Americans surrender their guns because guns are bad, guns are evil. And no, they're not. The reason for the Second Amendment, and it's got nothing to do with hunting or target shooting, the Second Amendment exists to give the government a good excuse or a good reason to leave we the people alone. Stop meddling with our private lives the way they have been doing here. Now, there's a story out in Indiana. There was this gentleman who was arrested and convicted for assaulting a police officer who basically crashed into his home. Well, it didn't crash into his home. It was a really silly situation. The officer came up to talk to this guy. Guy opened the door. The officer stuck his foot into the door. Door-to-door salesman tactic. And when the resident of the home closed the door, it hit the officer's foot, and they arrested him for assaulting the officer. And they convicted him. Well, the courts just overturned the conviction on the basis of Indiana's castle doctrine. And a lot of states have this. And it's based on the phrase, a man's home is his castle. If you're in your own home and somebody comes in without your permission, you have a right to defend yourself. And there's also other laws. The Supreme Court decision, John Bad Elk versus United States. When the police officers are within the letter of the law, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the people are obligated to provide their full, respectful, polite cooperation. If the police are acting outside the law, you have a right to defend yourself, up to and including the use of lethal force. And these days, with the cops just gunning Americans down left and right, we do have a right to defend ourselves. The Second Amendment says common sense says we should have the same weapons the criminals have, the ones they're getting from Fast and Furious. We have a right, an inherent right, an automatic right. It's not granted by the government. It is a natural right the Bill of Rights recognizes as pre-existing. A right to defend ourselves against criminals, whether they're street criminals or government criminals. Now, speaking of government criminals, there are a couple of really horrific stories going on here. And a lot of it has to do with modern education, and in particular surrounding Common Core. Because Common Core is not about education, it's about indoctrination. And there's a story over at WorldNet Daily where students are not being graded on whether they're getting correct answers to problems, but they're basically grading the student on their attitudes, their values, and their beliefs. They're brainwashing our kids, and those who will accept the brainwashing are getting the A's, and those who are resistant to the brainwashing are getting flunked. It's just absolute nonsense. Now, there's another story over in Blacklisted News where a school superintendent has confirmed Common Core publisher is spying on kids' social media. Pearson. They'll come into a school district. They were here in Hawaii mucking things up. They'll put in their propaganda and their indoctrination. Then they spy on the kids' social media to make sure the propaganda and indoctrination is working. That's not education. That's dictatorship. They're trying to brainwash our kids and just emotionally shut them down. Turn them into useful drones who will do whatever job they're ordered to do, kill who they're told to do, torture whoever they're told to do. Got another story coming out of Investment Watch Block where students are being forced to submit to a facial recognition scanner to take tests. Doesn't the teacher know who they are? They're getting these kids ready to live in a world where everywhere you go, you're scanned, you're scoped, you're observed, the telescreen is watching you. Get them used to the idea that they have no privacy whatsoever. Remember that big stink of, I think it was about a year and a half ago, where they caught school administration officials spying on kids in their bedroom, in their home, through the cameras of school-provided laptops. And we know kids, when they're in their bedroom, they're not often dressed, and sometimes they're doing things that they'd rather be private. And the school administrators are watching them. And here's a story out of Virginia, and you're not going to believe this. Okay, there was a 6th grader in the Gifted and Talented program at Bedford Middle School in Bedford, Virginia. A school vice principal, an assistant principal rather, found a leaf in this kid's backpack that looked like marijuana. And they suspended him for a year and reported him to the police. Now, this kid is the son of 2 other teachers. Excellent student, no problems whatsoever. And because of this report, he was kicked out of school, had to be homeschooled. He had to be evaluated by a psychiatrist for substance abuse problems. He was charged with marijuana possession in juvenile court. It turns out the leaf was not marijuana. They did 3 tests on it trying to prove it was marijuana, and it turned out to be just something else. And here is where it gets interesting. Yes, they dropped the charges in juvenile court. Yes, they said you don't have to go to the psychiatrist anymore for substance abuse problems. The school maintains the suspension is valid because students who have materials that merely look like illegal drugs or merely joke about illegal drugs can be suspended. Now look, kids are young, they're enthusiastic, they joke about all kinds of things. And this kind of a policy of suspending kids for merely joking about drugs is just a way of shutting them down. They're going to come out of the school afraid to say anything at all to anybody about anything because they'll be punished for it. This kid is totally innocent, and look what the school's doing to him. And he's one of their best, most gifted students as well. And it's not just the schools. There's an article over in governmentslaves.info. The Department of Homeland Security is now considering online gamers who play war games and photographers as suspicious individuals, justifying extended surveillance on them. They're getting into this whole pre-crime attitude. We think you might be bad, so we have a right to watch you. Now, there's a little bit of good news. Down in San Diego, there was a rapper who was thrown in jail for a rap song that had lyrics about gang violence. And he was jailed under this bizarre law where his lyrics were supposed to be supporting gang violence. And a judge just threw it out of court. Said, this is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. We're leading to a nation in which you can't even comment on current events without being punished. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about this horrible transformation of education, where it's all about indoctrination. It's about emotional suppression. The purpose of all these unannounced live fire drills in schools is to just traumatize kids so they won't even want to look at a firearm. Somebody put up this very interesting video going back and reprising TV commercials for toy guns back in the 1950s where you could get guns that looked realistic and, hey, I'm being a World War II soldier and I'm being a cowboy, and this was part of the American culture. And now they're trying to terrorize our children so that they see a gun and they'll just cringe. And it's sadly working. And in my living room, I've got a flintlock on a plaque on the wall. And unfortunately, due to Hawaii's climate, it's not really fireable anymore, but it makes a great decoration. And I had somebody come in and say, is that a real gun? And I said, well, it used to be. And he said, oh, it's a gun. You know, like this person thought this thing was going to leap off the wood plaque and just savage them right there on the living room floor. It's mind control is really what it is. So getting back to this WorldNet Daily article. Teachers now thought police with extreme new spy tools, and they're talking about another gizmo. And apparently this is also tied in with Pearson, which is this British-based educational publication company which has just sort of cornered the whole market for Common Core all over the globe. They were even here. And we knew somebody who worked for them, and it was just hugely corrupt. They were double billing the Department of Education. So they've got this new smartphone application for teachers called BOSS, which stands for Behavioral Observation of Students in Schools. And this application secretly monitors every single behavior of targeted students in the classroom. Is this student fidgeting in his chair too much? Is he socializing with students around him in an appropriate manner, with appropriate being decided by some government bureaucrat? Is he too much of a loner? Is he staring aimlessly out the window when he should be paying attention to the teacher? Well, if the teacher's boring the crud out of him, yeah. And they're putting it all together in a dossier on the students to be there for later analysis as the government guides the child through his future course. I mean, this is right out of George Orwell. Over in France, they're passing all of these draconian laws about support for terrorism, and it's so loosely written that any discussion of terrorism can be prosecuted and the person jailed. Even discussions about the subject of terrorism in an academic environment. If you're in a class talking about the effect of terrorism, even if you're saying terrorism is bad, we're literally getting into Orwell, where they're trying to bring about newspeak. And if you're not familiar with the book, first of all, you should be reading it. That's your homework assignment. There'll be a pop quiz on Monday. You got to read George Orwell's 1984, or at least see the wonderful John Hurt, Richard Burton movie that they made from it, which doesn't capture all the nuances to begin with. But the government of Orwell's dystopian society is creating a whole new language. that everybody will be forced to learn in school and the old language will go away. And the new language does not allow any words for banned thoughts. And the idea is that we will take away a word that describes a particular thought, and then the thought itself will simply not be able to occur to the brain. And we're getting into that kind of situation right now. All right, speaking of brainwashing and dystopian societies and dictatorships that tell you what you will believe, let's talk about human-caused global warming. Because earlier today, I saw a story over at, I saw it at Mashable. And the headline of the story was, basically the only unusually cold place on Earth last month was the eastern U.S., and it starts out by saying, February was Earth's second warmest such month on record, finishing up as the second warmest winter and the warmest 12-month period on record according to preliminary NASA data. Well, we all know what NASA stands for. Never a straight answer. And they're already out there trying to say that, it was a warm year and a warm winter, and it was only in New England where they had this odd snow thing happen, which is nonsense. There was that town in Italy got 100 inches of snow in a single 18-hour period. Last Friday, here in Hawaii, we had a blizzard on the Big Island that required the evacuation of the observatories. The Mexico City Puebla Freeway was closed by snow just a few days ago. These people are actually out there convinced that if they just lie to you often enough and loud enough and keep on repeating it, that you will eventually believe it. And maybe in the 1950s and 1960s that would work. Another piece of propaganda coming out. Arctic melting may spur heat waves in Europe and the United States. They're already forecasting it's going to be a scorching summer as measured by their thermometers that they have located at places like the airport, surrounded by jets burning tons of kerosene, or located next to trash incinerators, as we've documented. They're still trying to sell you this because they want to carbon tax you. They want you to submit to a global environmental authority. Meanwhile, back in the real world, snow is going to return to the Northeast on the first day of spring, this Friday. There's another cold system coming on in. Portland, Maine, which is normally used to dealing with average winters, went way over their budget for snow cleanup. They now need federal financial assistance to pay for getting rid of all that snow. And, of course, with all that snow, we're going to have major flooding all over New England. Meanwhile, up in Nova Scotia, their fishing industry has taken a hit because the water up there was so cold, the fish were dying. And they're now starting to wash up on Shelburne shorelines, and of course they're not available for harvesting to the fishing industry. Remember 10 years ago, snowfalls are now a thing of the past. And now we're getting global warming causes snowfall. You will believe as we tell you to believe. Look deep into my eyes. Watch the watch. You will believe as we tell you to believe. If you don't believe as we tell you to believe, the terrorists will win. Story out of Penny for Your Thoughts at Blogspot. Study finds Earth's ocean abyss has not warmed. Not warmed. Back in 2013, the global warming folks were trying to explain away the lack of warming by saying the heat was hiding in the bottom of the ocean. This actually came out from the IPCC up at the United Nations. The deep ocean water is taking the heating away from the surface. Have you ever heard of convection? Warm water rises, cold water sinks. It's why the abyss is as cold as it is. But either these people at the IPCC don't understand the theory of convection, or they're just hoping that you don't, because this was nonsense the day they said it. And now they're confirming there's been no heating in the deep ocean depths. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And looking at this constant drumbeat of lies about human-caused global warming. And it's not science, it's politics. It's convincing you that something that happens naturally, climate change, is all your fault. And it's warming driven by your carbon, and that giant pulsating ball of fusing hydrogen in the sky's got nothing to do with it. In order to trick you out of carbon taxes getting you to buy carbon credits, tricking you into allowing some global environmental authority to decide for you how you will live your life. Now, if this was really science behind this, then when the world started cooling, they would have said, aha, we've solved the problem. And they'd move on to another project. But the world has been demonstrably cooling for the last 15 years. And all we get is hide the decline, rigging the data, harassing anybody who will not toe the line. You've got Al Gore running around now saying anybody who denies human-caused global warming must be punished. That's not science. It's not debate. That's dictatorship. We really are going into a new dark ages where the rulers are going to torture anybody who doubts that the earth is the center of the universe. It's very alarming, and you need to decide when you're going to get angry about this, about all the lies. Because when the government lies to you over and over and over again, even though you know it's a lie, doesn't that show that the government has no respect for you at all as a human being, as a person, as a citizen? You're just there to be manipulated, to be made profit off of, to be looted for your money, for the lives of your children, for the wars, your property, your the herd, your livestock, your human capital, whatever term you want to use for it. A government that lies to their own people does not respect their people. And a government that doesn't respect their own people, that's dictatorship. And that's where we are right now. And you should feel very insulted that the people behind this hoax really do think you're so stupid you don't understand convection and why it's nonsensical to say that the heat that was supposed to be warming the planet is hiding in the bottom of the ocean. Because warm water rises. Even if you had some way of magically putting all that warm water at the bottom of the ocean, it would not stay there. I do get sick and tired of a government that lives by lies and continues to lie because they don't know anything else to do. They don't know any other way to run the country. They've survived on lies and fraud for so long, they literally have forgotten how to run an actual republic that serves the nation and the people. Except for people like Ron Paul, who's no longer in the government, and Cynthia McKinney, same notation. Alrighty, well, as you're aware, a U.S. Ebola patient has been brought back to the United States from Sierra Leone, and apparently his situation is deteriorating, despite the very latest and greatest of medications they're pumping into him, although I don't think they're trying colloidal silver. They're basically pumping this guy full of whatever product the big pharmaceutical companies are getting ready to sell all of us when the big Ebola scare goes booga boo booga. Now, this study is showing that goats fed genetically modified soybean are producing abnormal milk. The chemistry is different. It's wrong. And as a result, the little goats are suffering medical harm. They're not gaining weight. They're not growing the way they ought to because of that biochemistry here. Speaking of government overreach, the Environmental Protection Agency now wants computerized monitoring of the bathrooms in hotels to make sure that hotel guests are not wasting water and spending too much time in the shower. Now, I am certain that you will agree with me that what I'm doing in the bathroom involving water is nobody's business but my own. But now the EPA wants to peek into your bathrooms, at least in the hotels. That's where it'll start. Then it'll be your home, to make sure that you're not using too much water because of all the serious drought problems. Well, there wouldn't be a drought problem if the EPA had kept the fracking companies from poisoning 2 large aquifers in California. They keep making these bad decisions and then dumping the consequences onto we the people. Now, Coca-Cola is caught in a new scandal. Apparently, they were running a massive payola scheme where they were going out to news sites normally dealing with health, nutrition, and so forth, and they were paying large amounts of money to get these sites to say that Coca-Cola is a healthy snack. Energy pick-me-up. Of course, you remember what Coca-Cola started with. It actually had cocaine in it. That's what made them the big, huge empire they were. But now they're out there bribing people to say that Coca-Cola is a healthy snack. Can full of high fructose corn syrup, phosphoric acid, chemical flavorings, one of which is known to be carcinogenic, that's a healthy snack, according to America's corporate-run media circus. I remember years back there was a similar scandal where the Mars Candy Company had gone out and given huge grants and generous support to nutritionists in exchange for them saying that eating a Mars candy bar mid-morning was good nutrition, made good nutritional sense, give your body all that it needs to get through the workday. Speaking of high fructose corn syrup, another story out of governmentslaves.info, the industry has succeeded in getting permission to rebrand high fructose corn syrup as simply fructose. And they're not the same thing. Fructose is a specific kind of sugar, and high fructose corn syrup is something else that includes fructose. And high fructose corn syrup is used by corporate food producers because it's less expensive than regular sugar, and it lasts longer in the truck, on the shelves, in the container. You don't get separation out. That means you have less loss to product. But it's not necessarily what's best for people to be eating. And there is a significant portion of our population, and I'm one of them, where I have no problem eating sugar from sugar beets and sugar cane. But high fructose corn syrup will trigger a hypoglycemic reaction. I can't do high fructose corn syrup, and I need to know if it's in my food so I can avoid it, like I avoid monosodium glutamate. And the corporate culture, backed up by the FDA and the USDA, is you don't have any business knowing what's in your food. Just understand that this is what we're going to sell you, and that's what you're going to eat, and that's the end of it. You don't need to know what's in your food. You don't need to know if it's GMO. You don't need to know what chemicals are in there. That's proprietary secrets for the food corporations. Alrighty, let's see, going on else. Down in Adelaide, Australia, Archbishop Philip Wilson has been charged with concealing child sexual abuse, apparently in connection with a known pedophile priest, Jim Fletcher, dating back to the 1970s. And Wilson is now announcing that he is going to step down after being charged by the New South Wales police. Arkansas Republican gave adopted girls to rapists because they were possessed by demons. And this is one of those stories that creates a huge force of gravity between the palm of your hand and your forehead. Arkansas State Representative Justin Harris adopted a pair of girls and then rehomed them to another house where one of the girls was raped because Harris thought the children could communicate telepathically and were possessed by demons. Ooh, evil demons running all over the girls. Our government really is insane. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we were talking about some of those naughty clergy or out there and that state senator who adopted the girls and then just shoved them into another house because they were possessed by demons. There's a very interesting article over at the Waking Times, and apparently it's about a proposal that involves Israel's former President Shimon Peres and Pope Francis to create what they're calling a UN of religions. And this is supposed to be a proposed organization with unquestionable authority to proclaim God's will all across the planet. And Perez is saying that putting all religions on the planet under a single world authority is required to combat terrorism. So the New World Order, along with everything else, is going to tell you what your religious beliefs are going to be. Because we have to get rid of those icky-poo Muslims, because they're the source of terror, and everybody will be Christian. We really are going into a new dark ages here when they're talking about things like that. A single global governmental authority in charge of your spirituality. I mean, this is so contrary to the founding principles of the United States of America, where our government is not allowed to show any respect for any one institution of religion over any other. And now they're talking about a globalist UN of religions. Basically, it's a super Vatican, and I can understand why Perez approached Pope Francis about it. There was this science fiction book, I think it was by Robert Heinlein, if I remember correctly, and I think the title was This Can't Go On Any Longer. And it was a continuation of a series of stories he told about the rise of this religious cult called Fosterism that eventually took control of the United States of America and what it was like living under a religious dictatorship. And here we are. They're actually talking about that. All right, I want to get back to a story that we were talking about before where we have found out that the antiquities that ISIS were seen to be smashing in that video to get us all riled up about what evil, bad people they are turned out to be plaster fakes. Props. And all of these things, the desecration of churches, smashing up the museums, abusing puppy dogs, tearing tags off of couch cushions, is all part of the propaganda to get you to hate ISIS so much that you will, without question, fling your money and the lives of your children into any country on earth where the U.S. tells you ISIS is. Like they're now saying is Afghanistan. But it did bring up the issue about the destruction of real antiquities. And there was a story over in Global Research. Iraq, the ultimate war crime, erasing the history of Mesopotamia, the destruction of Nineveh. And they're talking about how Iraq's cultural history has been greatly erased since the U.S. invasion. They built part of a U.S. Air Force base over the remains of the city of Ur. They've built parking lots over other archaeological sites. During the invasion of 2003, the U.S. military guarded and protected that oil ministry, but left the Baghdad Museum wide open. And when criticized for that, Donald Rumsfeld simply came back and said, hey, stuff happens. Now, there may be a deliberate agenda at work here. And I've talked about it before. I'm going to talk about it again. There is legitimate reasons to suspect Iraq's ancient archaeological sites are facing complete destruction as a deliberate policy. And here's why. Egypt is literally littered with the ruins of the ancient temples and palaces of her rulers. As much as has been found in Egypt, it's estimated they've only found 1/3 of Egypt's archaeological wonders. They discovered another temple just digging a sewer line. And a cache of finely preserved mummies was literally stumbled over by a cow in a pasture. It's everywhere. Same thing with Iraq. Ancient sites all over. Iran, Syria, all of these places. You can't go in there without and take 2 steps without tripping over the hard scientific proof of their ancient history. Now, this has to be a huge annoyance to Israel, because we are raised from birth with the Old Testament or Torah tales of the greatness of the ancient Israelites, of the powerful kingdoms of David and Solomon, and the First Temple. And yet Israel, while rich in antiquities, is almost totally devoid of artifacts from this supposedly glorious time in her history. The existence, the proof of the fabled First Temple was supported with just 2 artifacts. A carved staff ornament in the shape of a pomegranate made out of ivory, and the Jehoash tablet, both of which have since been exposed as frauds. Now, we're constantly being told that there was once a magnificent temple on that hill, but it just all kind of sort of went away, leaving no trace whatsoever. And yet the myth of that temple is Israel's entire justification for taking that land away from the Palestinians. Now, the wonders emerging from the soils of Egypt, Iraq, Iran, and other countries serve as a constant reminder that ancient buildings of such a scale, as we are told the first temple was, simply do not vanish without a trace. Now, there is a good reason to suspect that the stories told in the Old Testament are just that, stories. The Bible is not science. It is the collected stories of a primitive tribal people reassuring each other how important they are. And like fishermen talking about the one that got away, or Ramses with his temple carvings of the did not really happen victory over the Hittites at Kadesh, the writers of these ancient stories assumed the people they were telling these stories to had no way to verify the claims, so embellishment was a low-risk activity. We do know from the available archaeological evidence that the Exodus probably actually happened to the Hyksos, not the Israelites. We know that the story of Moses is suspect because no Egyptian princess would hide a Hebrew child inside Pharaoh's household, then give the kid a Hebrew name. Moses is actually an Egyptian title meaning a prince, and it's included in the names of many of Egypt's pharaohs, such as Tutmoses, Ahmoses, or Ramoses, which has been altered over time to Ramses. But a good story is a good story is a good story. And we know that much of the Old Testament was copied from other sources, like the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, Israel's entire justification for being in possession of that part of the world is based on the writings of the Torah. And those archaeological sites found in other countries are a political threat for a nation whose claimed ancient history remains totally unsupported by science. And in that context, we have an explanation for the behavior of the U.S. military, which posted guards around the Iraq oil ministry but left the Baghdad Museum unguarded and open to plunder, built runways over archaeological sites, parking lots over others, allowed soldiers to go out and desecrate these archaeological sites, much as the way we're being told ISIS is doing. But we're supposed to be upset when ISIS does it, but not when the American forces do it. And we know that throughout history, when one nation conquers another, the first thing they want to do is erase the cultural memory of the conquered people. When Hawaii was annexed by the missionaries from the United States, the first thing they did is they went down to Iolani Palace and they stripped it down to the walls and they just sold everything for pennies. Get it out of here. We don't want any more memories. It's taken decades trying to recover all of this stuff. They found one of the Queen's personal tables in a Goodwill shop. And that, I think, is what's going on. Trying to erase the ancient history of the Middle East so we won't have any kind of a connection to them. Or they to themselves. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get some animation work done. We will be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices. Please share what you know with everybody you know. Tell them about Genesis. Tell them about whatreallyhappened.com. We need your support if we're going to stop this world war before it gets to the nuclear stage. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.